G'day. In the previous video on making up this shape, I concentrated mainly on the forming the dimple in the bottom and showed you how to make the tool for that. Aluminium is probably not the best material to be using for an oil can. It's relatively soft, can be easily damaged, and so I'm now going to make some cans out of steel. I've welded up the tubes and now got the cones. I now had to trim the cones off and do a few other odds and sods. And so this is a bit more about making up these cans and some of the steps involved. For example, aluminium, I could just put that on the linisher and get that down to size. This being steel, not so easy to do. And there's some stainless steel just for the pure hell of it. That's even harder. And so I'm going to be making up a trimming jig for the lathe. I need to make up some welding jigs so that I can weld these things together more easily, because one of the problems I had with doing this one was, gaps and holding things and all that sort of thing. So, it's a good idea if you're doing something completely new, make up a prototype, try it out, see what problems you run into, and then you're better armed for doing the rest of it. There have been some questions about how do you work out a cone, because the cones I've made here, you would have just seen me with a half circular piece cut out, and that was about it. So how do you work it out? Well, to start with, we go for similar triangles. If you look at what that triangle there is, the angle of that is going to be the same as that triangle there. And that length there is going to be the radius of the circle that you want to cut your cone section out of. That length there is going to be this length here. Right, so it's going to be this dimension there. Okay, so that's where I get the geometry to make these cones from. So that dimension there is this radius here, so I better put that in there. R, and that's dimension, well, that's 2R. Okay, so that's how you get that bit. Now, what proportion of this to use? This is an interesting one. You know what that angle there is, or you can work out what that angle there is, whether you do it on CAD, whether you do it with basic trig. One thing I've discovered is that if you take the cos of that angle, that is going to be, and multiply that by 360 degrees, that is going to be how many degrees of this you want. Now, that's a 60 degree angle in there. The cos of 60 degrees is 0.5, and so basically I needed half of that ring. I then bent that up, welded that, and I've got my cone. So that's how you work out these cones. Another way to do it is the rollation method. You could just get a disc that big and a disc that big, separate them out and roll that on a bit of paper. But this is a way of doing that without having to worry about bits of paper. Sometimes it's easy to use the paper, sometimes it's easier to do the maths. Once you start getting into volumes, and the bigger the volume, the more you do, you need to start looking at some tooling. So this is the stuff that I've assembled for this particular job. This one you're familiar with is the tool that formed the ends here. I also used this to clean up the edge in the lathe so that I've got a reasonably square edge. There are a couple of spots there which are a little bit low, but I think I can fill those without too many dramas. These are the tubes I've made up. Now there are some out of just mild steel, and there's some out of stainless. And the stainless is really just to see, well, can I do something with stainless along these lines. This is a little tip that I picked up from Quinn on Blondie Hacks, and she used it for her boiler that she's making. But it's a tight-fitting plug, and I pushed that down there with the press just to get a reasonably round bore, because with the welding it distorts. The reason for the holding here is that I've got this set up so that I can now use that as a jig to knock down that edge. So what I'm aiming to do there is to have an edge a bit like that one where it's slightly rounded over. I'll then trim that up in the lathe again, and that way when I come to weld these two together, I've got two square edges that are going to meet pretty much like a butt joint, and that'll make my welding a bit easier. To trim that up, I've got this jig, and this is just a bit of plastic, and it's only plastic because that's what I had sitting around the place. And the way this one works is that I have this with a strap. I put two screws in there. These are just to keep things level, and then I can hold that in the lathe and trim that front face down. I can also reverse this, and using this cone, pull that up. So I'll put that on some spacers. I've made up some little spacers here. Put that on some spacers to pull that up, and then I can come along in the back here and trim this off, and these screws will be reversed here to just level that all up, so that's all good. I'm also going to use this like so with a smaller bolt on there, so that I can put a cone on there, and then I can get one of my tubes, put that on there, and that'll give me something that'll hold that as a welding jig. These things need a little bit of finessing, but you get the idea. So the other jigs that I'm making up to assist me with making these things up. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is mounting the cones, now that I've rounded the edge off, backward in this jig, trimming that edge off so I've got a reasonably straight and square edge, and then I can start welding things together. One thing about welding, I was watching some videos by Pacific Art Welding, I think it is, link will be down below, talking about weld and colour of weld, and he was saying that if you're getting grey on your weld like that, you've probably got a little bit too much heat and you need to pick up your travel speed, possibly look at your gas coverage, because that's oxide and that's wasting your time. And so I've tried doing that here, and I'm pleased to say that I've got a little bit of pink down here rather than the grey, so it looks like I'm getting better. So he's worth watching too. He's an artisan welder, but has a few ideas there for helping improve your welding. I've sized the inside of the bores with a plug, and that's purely to get a consistent both round and diameter. The cones, when I did those, I faced those off in the lathe, both ends, and so the diameters there are consistent. So seam around here wasn't a big drama. The last thing to go on is going to be the bottom pieces. Now, these were made using the die, putting them there, hammering them over. That works. It certainly gets you in the ballpark, but I thought I'd like to get a little bit better control of the size. So, adopting the plug here in reverse, That's just a lump of 8mm steel. I've tried to clean it up, but oh well, these things sometimes don't happen. What I'm going to do is basically get my blank, using my die again, or my form, whatever you want to call it, again, and push that through here using the hydraulic press. And what that'll do is actually give me a size that is consistent and is hopefully close to the size. It's basically the diameter of this form plus 2 material thicknesses. So it's ironing it out a little bit. And here's one that here's one I did earlier. And as you can see, the sizing there is quite nice, and so I should be able to go around that with the TIG torch with minimal dramas. The last bit of tooling that I'm making up is this. This is just a bit of 1/2-inch water pipe, and I've TIG brazed a little bit across the top with a slight curve on it. And the idea is that that's going to sit in there like so. Now it's going to do two things for me. When I welded up my aluminium version, I had a lot of trouble getting everything lined up. So this sits, the cylindrical part sits on the tube, that's all good. But this also provides a little bit of backing for the joint. Now, in this one it's not quite so important, but if I was doing something like stainless, it'd be really nice to have that backing there because it helps exclude the oxygen so you get a cleaner joint. Copper weld has a lot of trouble sticking to copper. You can weld copper, but steel, etc., doesn't stick to copper terribly easily. And so I'm going to be able to put the end on that, tack it, run a bead, do a little bit of a weld, move it round, and so on, and fingers crossed. That'll give me a nice clean weld on the inside, a nice solid weld on the outside, which I can dress back, and that'll be basically the end of the body to do. The next bit will be making up a ring to sit on here with a thread on it, so I can put a cap on. But that'll be the subject of another video. But making up something as simple as an oil can would require so much tooling. But that's the way it is sometimes. Thanks for watching. Please share, and we'll see you for the next one.